Good morning, YouTube. Today I'm going to be pulling and changing the CP3 fuel pump on my 2004 Duramax diesel truck. I haven't really started. All I've done so far is I dropped the front wheels off and got it as low to the ground as I can so it's easy to stand at. What I'm going to do before I come back is disconnect the batteries and drain about 3 gallons of coolant out, and that is going to be right here on the passenger side. Underneath is a valve underneath the radiator, and we can drain some coolant out because we've got some things. The CP3 pump actually lives back in here. You can kind of see that terminal down there. That's the regulator. But we've got a lot of things to remove. I only have one alternator, so normally there would be a lot of the trucks would have an option where there was another one here. I've only got this one, and so we've got to remove a lot of things from in this area. And I'm going to go ahead and start by disconnecting the batteries and draining about 3 gallons of coolant out of the radiator. Okay, like I said a minute ago, drain the coolant. I'm on the passenger side here. I've already got the fender well out for changing the fuel filter, and so that's right here on the radiator. Underneath the radiator hose, a little valve. I got to start it with some pliers, and I got a bucket ready. I'm going to go ahead and pull the plug and drain it out. Okay, after you pull that plug, it's going to kind of look like that, pretty wimpy. I'm about to go up top and open the yeah, sure I am. I can't even think of the name of it. Reservoir for the coolant, just a little bit, and we'll notice the flow start to increase in speed down here. An 8mm wrench will remove your battery terminals. Just get those out of the way. Okay, YouTube, so next thing we're going to do is remove the serpentine belt. I've gone ahead and put a 1/2 inch drive wrench. It goes right in the hole about halfway through the tensioner. Don't grab a 14mm socket and don't try to remove the nut on here. You'll remove the tensioner. It's not the way you're supposed to do that. So a 1/2 inch breaker bar works ideal. I've got a socket wrench and a pipe. But push it towards the driver's side and it will free up that belt for you. The routing is right here. If you need to pause that for a second, go ahead. I think this is mine. I can't really read the writing, but the other thing that I did as a part of a troubleshooting thing before I started this was I actually removed the oil fill tube, which is real simple, 2 bolts, and the oil fill tube pulls out. It's got an O-ring seal, and down inside of here, what I did was I took silver Sharpie and I Sharpied the end of the stud, the nut, the washer behind there, and then even behind there, even kind of hard to see, there's a gear which drives the CP3 pump. And so all of these things are attached to the CP3 pump. And what I was trying to test was to see if once I cranked the motor over with the starter, if that nut was loose, if that gear was loose, I wanted to see if the pump was spinning on the rest of the internal drivetrain of the engine. I found out that mine was spinning, which meant that my pump was bad. I also uncracked a fuel injector line. I think that's 15 or 17mm line. Unthreaded it a couple turns, and when I cranked the motor over, I didn't get a single drop of fuel to come out of that line. Now these fuel rails are designed to operate at like 20,000 psi, 25,000 psi, and I didn't get a single drop of fuel. So, I mean, this engine compartment should have been getting soaked in fuel, and it wasn't. So, I obviously know that something is wrong. The other precaution I did was I disconnected my regulator, which is, you can do that without even with small fingers or little tools you can get in there. It's right back there. That's the regulator. And if you disconnect the regulator from the rest of the body harness, this CP3 pump will operate at full bore, which means technically if the regulator goes bad, sometimes they can go bad in a way where the fuel pump won't pump fuel. Other times they go bad where they're pumping at full bore. So to just prove that that wasn't the problem, I disconnected that and tried to start it, and it would not start. So the regulator is probably fine, but the actual pump is what's toasted. And so I checked that, and those were some testing that I had done before all of this happened. So anyways, when we get the belt off, we will get to the next step. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the intake off. We disconnect the mass airflow sensor, get that out of the way. I've already loosened the clamp at the turbo intake horn, and we're going to pull the air box out and get all those things up and out of the way. Inevitably, a lot of the things in here are all going to be gone in a few minutes. So there's a band clamp around this intake horn of the turbo. Loosen that up with the screwdriver, and you can take that out carefully. All right, the next thing we're going to move out of the way, we're going to relocate this air conditioning compressor. So there's 4 studs or 4 bolts that hold that in, and that is a 15 millimeter. We're going to pull those. We're going to remove these sensor wires, and then we're going to lay the entire unit over here to the passenger side, kind of where the intake was. Just get it out of the way. Be careful of the aluminum lines. We're not going to undo any of the lines. We're going to leave it all so we don't have to fill it up with Freon or have any leaks or anything. Should be fine to just get it out of the way. You can remove these clips from the body clip here, and sometimes there's one up right here. Mine's already removed. We're going to pull those and get this out of the way. Okay, so if you're still watching this, I'm sorry. The fun is just getting started. See, I've got the AC compressor laying out of the way. Kind of gently modified this aluminum pipe over here to lay that out of the way. I have done an EGR delete on this truck, which is for off-road use only, as my lawyers would say. But go ahead and get a 12 millimeter socket. You're going to need to pull this side of the intercooler off of the intake, the Y bridge, they call it, between the 2 manifolds, or between the 2 heads here. So we're going to pull that off, and we're going to undo one of these band clamps. I'm also going to cut these zip ties to get the harness out of the way. We've got to move a lot of wires in the way here, and then we'll start with the cooling system probably after that. There's a 10 millimeter bolt that is right here on top of the thermostat housing. I'm going to pull that off. In the case of my aftermarket pipe here, it's got a extension that comes out. I'm also going to remove this positive terminal off the battery. It's 10 mil, or off the, excuse me, this positive terminal off of the alternator. It's a 10 millimeter. Just pull the boot off, and that will get that battery cable out of my way and back to there. Then I should be able to get this pipe off here. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is pull the alternator, which, because we've already removed this output terminal here, all we've got to do is pull the sensor off there, and then we're going to 2 14 millimeter bolts here. They're real long and they go throughout the whole thing there. Pull those out, and then this will come free and give us some more space. Okay, so in order to free up this last harness, there's a sensor on the air conditioning evaporator that is right back here. I've pulled that. There's also a sensor down underneath coolant reservoir, and when you pull those 2 out, because we just took the alternator off, this whole harness can lay it off to the driver's side and get it out of the way, so that we can get to the next order of business, which will be removing the thermostat upper housing. It's basically a bunch of 12 millimeter bolts. We're also going to pull this 12 millimeter bolt off here for the heater core in the cab, and this is a rubber hose, so get that out and just get it up off to the driver's side by the battery and out of the way there. And then we'll start removing some radiator hoses. Just a little side note, the alternator bolts are actually 15 millimeter, not 14 millimeter. Okay, so what I've done here is removed all the 12 millimeter bolts holding the thermostat housing in. My thermostats are not that old, but I'm probably going to replace them anyways, just so that I'm sure it seals good. I've also removed the 12 millimeter bolt here that threads into the valve cover, and instead of undoing this seal here, I'm actually undoing this thread here. I'm actually going to take this hose off because it looks like this hose is bad, and I'm probably going to replace it. So I'm just going to pinch that there. I'm also going to take this driver's side radiator hose off, but just from here. I'll leave it on the radiator, but I will remove it with this clamp here, and then this whole upper thermostat pipe will be out of the way, and we can start tearing into more things. Okay, so to get to this bolt back here underneath the electrical connections, the easiest way is actually to just remove these connections. Pinch, read the picture here, basically pinch the locks, and this gray tab pulls up and it's cambered, and then the connection comes right out. Careful not to pull too hard on the blue that you don't actually pull the pins all out of the connection. But the same story with both of these, just squeeze these gray tabs, and this big gray lever will come up. As soon as you get the lower one out, it's pretty easy to get to that bolt, which is directly underneath, and then you'll actually be able to remove this radiator tube with the thermostat housing. 2 Torx 30 bolts, which will remove the female side of these big connectors and get them out of the way, so pull both of those out, and then you will be able to get to that. As I continue to remember where more and more of these bolts are for this harness bracket, there is one 12mm bolt next to the PVC there on the valve cover, and then there's also one right underneath that wiring harness, 12mm, that when those two are released should help you get this out of the way. I'm also going to disconnect this clip on the back of the bracket and get this end all loosened up a little bit. There's actually one more bolt behind the PVC, underneath there. The PVC comes out here, and then underneath there on the valve cover there's another bolt. Once you remove that, you can get the bracket free, and you will find that there's a little device on here. I'm guessing it converts signal from the pyrometer on the turbo here to signal that the computer can read. Anyways, I'm just going to remove that device, and then I'm going to relocate the wire and that device up here to get it out of my way. If you're still watching this, we are probably about halfway, maybe a little more than halfway done with taking it out. So what we're going to do next is remove this pipe here that goes to the Y bridge, and that should just come right out. There's some O-rings on there. Mine is pretty filthy. I don't know if you can see, I've got probably literally 1/4 of an inch of buildup happening. So this will definitely be getting some love with brake cleaner and a brass brush just to get all that out of there. Same thing with the Y bridge that is coming out today. The actual intake manifolds on the heads can stay on, but as you can also see, I have got a little friend. I've seen a lot of videos about how to do this, and people say, oh yeah, GM put insulation down in the valley of the motor to help it insulate it. No, they did not. If you have insulation in the valley of your Duramax diesel, that is because you have a critter. As you can see, I have a mouse of some sort that has eaten up all of that and put it all down here. I'm going to get the shot vac and vacuum that out carefully. Also, you can kind of, let me try to do this carefully, kind of see all that nasty buildup. All that buildup, that's a lot. And so this Y bridge will be getting cleaned out as well during this exercise here. This is the CP3 pump right here. You can kind of see there's the regulator, which we undid earlier. We're going to get the Y bridge out of the way and remove a bunch of these brackets for hoses. We're going to remove this one here, looks like about a 12mm. We're going to remove this one here, this nut on this stud here. We're going to remove this one. We are going to do on this side, same basic thing. I'm going to get a screwdriver and pry these wiring harnesses up out of their clamp, or maybe I'll just Actually, there's a 12 millimeter back here. If you can see that, we will remove that. We'll remove this 10 millimeter here and this 12 millimeter here, and then just get some more things up and out of the way so I can get the shot back in here and vacuum that out. Okay, so in an effort to get a big wiring harness out of the way, because the next major component we're going to remove is the Y bridge in between the two intake manifolds. What we're actually going to do is we're going to disconnect a couple of sensors. This one up here on the turbo looks like it goes to the servo for the vanes on a variable vane turbo setup, which is what the LLY has. We're going to remove that, and that attaches to the big harness. Another one, which again looks like it goes to the turbo, but I can't tell, is this one right here. And that is a little easier accessed from above. Might actually go into the fuel rail, looks like. So we're going to take that out, and that will give us a little more space to work. I've also disconnected one other sensor I forgot to tell you about. Probably pulled this one here as well, and then we'll be able to get to some of those bolts in the back, which will be kind of tricky with the turbo right there. But we'll do our best. Try to get the Y bridge out next, just kind of buried in things. Okay, so if you've been watching and following along, we're ready to remove the Y bridge. I've gone ahead and moved the wiring harness up along the turbo. I can't remember if I told you that or not. And I've gone along and removed a lot of these brackets that held wires and things on to get it up out of the way. I've also disconnected a coolant line right here to get that out of the way. And the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to remove the Y bridge. I've gone along and removed the top 4 10 millimeter bolts. Now I'm in the process of removing the bottom 4 10 millimeter nuts that are on studs. The studs are in the intake manifolds. I've also snapped off my map sensor, which is a $100 mistake. Don't do that. It does need to be removed. Carefully remove it without snapping it off. Anyway, so the way you're going to remove the back 4 nuts, you don't actually need to touch the turbo or remove it. All you need to do is get a set of 1/4 inch extensions, and you can diagonally get those from outside. If you don't have a 1/4 inch set, pause the video and go buy some. Also, we'll remove this coolant line. I'm just going to kind of bend this out of the way a little bit to get to the other side. Removing them is one thing. Well, they're probably going to drop in the valley, and then I'll pull this out. The way this is designed, it's slotted along the bottom, so you remove all the nuts and bolts and pull it straight up and out. I'll move this fuel line out of the way in a minute. And then the way we're going to have to put these nuts back in, because it's going to kind of be a pain in the butt, is I'm going to actually take a piece of paper towel and put it in between the socket and the nut to act like kind of like a magnetic socket, if you will. And then I'll put it on and tighten them up, and then when I pull it out, the piece of paper will be in there. But it'll be better than well, it'll basically be the only way to hold them in there. I wouldn't trust, you'd have to magnetize your sockets, I guess, is the other option. The CP3 has to come straight out of the engine because there's a large gear on the end of it. And once it comes out, I've been told to drop that gear down and pull the bottom of the pump out first, and it should clear these intake manifolds. It's a tight squeeze though, so it'll be interesting. Okay, so the next thing I've done is I have removed the passenger side accessory bracket, which is right here. There's a bunch of pulleys on it, 2 idler pulleys and the tensioner. I really wasn't sure what I needed to do, so I removed the computer from that bracket and removed the fuel line that goes to the computer. Leave all that on. There's enough play. You might actually need to remove the fuel line from the computer, but everything else can stay. There's a little washer, it's a real special washer. You'll see it. Just be careful with it. that goes on that fuel line and take that bolt out for the fuel line and just get it out of the way. You'll notice we're not going to be removing the fan today or the power steering pump. Just that. Now we should be able to get to all the bolts for the CP3. Now I'm actually going to go get my vacuum and vacuum out the valley, because I don't want any of that insulation to make it inside the motor. When we pull the CP3 out, we're exposing a big hole directly inside the crankcase, so we just want to make sure that it's all clean first. So I'm going to go ahead and get the vacuum. Okay, so the next step, we got to get to the CP3 bolts. I've gotten the Y bridge out and I found a whole bunch of crap, including a big spring and actually a couple wood screws. Kind of weird. It's pretty dirty down there, but we're going to get that vacuumed out. Just to review what I took out to do that, this is the special bolt and washer that threads into the fuel line and goes to the top of the computer on the passenger side. And then there's three bolts. Two of them are studs with nuts, and I was fortunate enough to get them all out when I took them. And then one of them is just a bolt. They are on that accessory bracket that I'll bring the camera down here and show you. So the top one is a nut and stud. The one underneath idler pulley is a nut and stud, and the one underneath there, right there, down in there, underneath the tensioner, that is a bolt. And I was able to get that through the fender well easier than I was from above. Those are 14 millimeters. And yeah, so I'm gonna go grab the vacuum now. All right, now we're gonna remove some fuel lines from the pump. Intake line here, a little crimp there. This might be return, I'm not really sure. But it is a little crimp there, and then there's a 17 millimeter on the high pressure side. And remove all three of those, and then we will grab some wrenches and extensions and come through the front to get some of these bolts for the pump. Okay, so we're ready to remove the pump. So let me walk you through these 4 bolts here on the front. On the passenger side, coming down, the top one you need to remove is, let me get my little pointer, right there. This one up here does not need to be removed. Just this one here. For the lower one, it's this one right in here. It goes all the way, it's a real long bolt, goes all the way clean through to the CP3. But I'm going to actually remove this nut here and this, which just holds this fuel line in. I've already undone this strapping here. I'm just going to pull this line out of my way just because it's kind of right in the way to get to that one. Again, you don't need to actually, this hole here is for the oil filler. You don't need to remove this to do this. I was just using it to check the nut and see if the pump was spinning, like I said earlier. On the other side, again, you don't need to remove this top nut. Just, this is the top right here. And underneath this coolant line right there is the 4th one. And that goes clean through. I think they're 12 millimeter. And when you get all 4 of those out, the pump will come straight. You'll have to pull it real hard. It'll come straight out. And then you can maneuver it to get it out of the valley. Okay, so I just wanted to show you the amount of trouble that I had to go through after I removed the 4 bolts. You'll notice where I'm at. It was kind of tricky. This has been in here for 230,000 miles and very tight. What I ended up doing after I got the bolts loosened a little bit, but that O-ring was basically seized in there really good, I took a long flat blade screwdriver and I gently pried between the front cover of the engine and the pump in about 3 different places. While I was doing that with one hand, I was holding the back of the pump with the other hand, and I just got it free. I'm hoping to rotate it out and get it out of the valley now. Okay, so I just got it out and I wanted to show you a couple more things I had to undo in order to make space to get it out. You can see here is where it mounts up. You can see there's 4 bolt holes there for it. And I actually had to undo a couple of high pressure fuel lines. One from the passenger side rail kind of travels through right in the way and then goes over and plugs in the middle of the driver's side. The other thing is the main feed, which comes from the pump. I disconnected it from the driver's side so I could have a little extra space to get things out. And I also relocated this line here, which goes to the computer, which I think is another fuel line. I relocated all of those. So just to wrap up this half of the video, I've got the CP3 pump removed. I got everything taped off. I'm going to do some cleaning a little later tonight. I'm waiting for the other pump to come in, and I need to get some thermostats and get everything cleaned. 230,000 miles of yuck everywhere. Hopefully get some deep cleaning done on this thing. And in the meantime, I pulled the pump out. It's right here on the ground here. I took the gear off, and how I did that was I used a socket on the nut, and I put a socket wrench inside of here to hold it, and I used the impact function on the impact wrench to remove that, because it would have just spun around otherwise. Then I carefully pulled it off the shaft, the tapered shaft here. And then the other thing I've removed from the pump is the adapter, and that was just a handful of 12mm bolts that go clean through the pump. This regulator is good. We'll probably reuse that. I think those are Torx 25. There's 3 of those. Just have to be careful not to strip them out. And I probably won't reuse any of these cracked rubber hoses. I'll probably go get new hoses. But other than that, a little plug here for Milwaukee Tool. I've been using these boxes to do projects like this. I've got everything labeled, and you can see here's my broken, sheared off map sensor, and then here's the other half of it that I pulled out of the intake manifold very carefully. So I've got to order one of those, but keeps everything nice and organized and sealed up. These boxes actually stack. I have about 10 of these boxes, and when I stack them on top of each other, I can clip them together. So on an even bigger job, makes it easier to keep track of everything. Yeah, so just a little plug for Milwaukee Tool. And we'll see you in part 2 when we start reassembling things. I've got a lot of cleaning out to do. The camera doesn't really do this justice of how bad this is. Yeah, it's pretty bad. That's Y bridge, and this is the pipe leading up to the Y bridge. This literally has 1/4 of an inch of buildup. Again, I said the camera doesn't do it very good justice, but it's gross. So I'll be taking a brass brush and some brake cleaner to all of these and getting them clean on the inside and out, mostly on the inside, and getting some new gaskets, as these are pretty toasty. Alright, see you in part 2.